A poor virgin stumbles through a blizzard, barefoot, half-frozen and alone, when the door of the most feared mountain man in Colorado swings open. He's known to kill wolves with his bare hands, yet instead of throwing her out, he carries her inside and says something no one's ever dared to say. "By winter you'll birth me twins." The words strike like thunder. Is it madness or prophecy? As the storm rages, the girl finds 2 crying newborns buried in the snow, just like he foretold. But when soldiers ride up the mountain searching for the babies, and the truth their dead mother took to the grave, this unlikely pair must decide: trust in God's strange promise or lose everything to man's law. Snow falls. Rifles rise. Did heaven truly send those twins, or did the devil come collecting? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind howled fierce and hungry across 10 Mile Ridge, rattling the sturdy logs of Thatcher Boone's cabin like wolf's teeth. Inside, the mountain man known as the Grizzly Saint stirred his fire, adding another piece of pine to ward off the growing cold. The flames cast dancing shadows on walls adorned with dried herbs and well-worn tools, testament to years of solitary living. A soft thud outside barely carried over the storm's rage. Boone's head snapped up, his weathered face alert. 20 years in these mountains had taught him to read every sound. That wasn't snow falling from branches or ice cracking against bark. That was something, or someone, falling. He crossed to the door in 3 long strides, his massive frame moving with the quiet grace of a lifetime spent stalking game. The iron handle was cold enough to bite as he pulled the door wide, letting in a swirl of snow and bitter wind that made the lamplight flutter. There, crumpled in a heap against his threshold, lay a girl no more than 19. Her thin dress was crusted with ice, her feet bare and blue-white with frost. For a moment, Boone stood frozen himself, his mind racing back to another night, another storm, when he'd been too late to save those he loved most. "Not this time, Lord," he whispered, his deep voice rough with emotion. "Not on my watch." He gathered her up as gentle as he could, noting how light she was, how her bones seemed sharp enough to cut through skin. Her face was young but drawn tight with suffering, dark circles beneath her closed eyes, speaking of long miles and longer troubles. Inside, Boone laid her carefully on his cot near the fire. He wrapped her in his thickest blanket, then set about the urgent work of saving her feet from the frost's bite. With practiced hands, he packed snow around them, letting it melt slowly to draw out the cold without shocking her system. "Stay with me, child," he murmured, working steadily. "The good Lord didn't lead you to my door just to let you slip away." As he tended to her, Boone began to pray aloud, his voice filling the cabin with words of supplication and hope. The familiar verses settled around them like a warm cloak, pushing back the darkness that prowled outside. Hours passed. The girl's breathing grew stronger, color returning slowly to her cheeks. When her eyes finally fluttered open, they were the wary eyes of someone used to finding trouble instead of kindness. "Where?" She tried to speak, but her voice cracked from thirst. Boone helped her sit up enough to sip water from his tin cup. "You're safe now," he said simply. "This here's my cabin on 10 Mile Ridge. I'm Thatcher Boone, though most folks hereabouts just call me Boone." She took another careful sip before speaking again. I was Alice Miller." The way she said it made clear that name held more pain than comfort. "Was?" Boone asked gently, settling back in his chair beside the cot. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. "Preacher Dawson. He sold my marriage papers for whiskey. Said since I was his ward he had the right. I ran before—" She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. Boone had seen enough of the world's darkness to fill in what she left unsaid. "Some men wear the cloth, but serve the devil," he said, his voice heavy with old anger. Then, more softly, "Names can be remade in God's sight, child, like Jacob became Israel after wrestling with his angels. What matters is who you choose to be from here forward." Alice looked at him then, really looked, taking in his massive frame, the scars that marked his face and hands, the strength and gentleness that seemed to war within him. "They call you the Grizzly Saint," she said suddenly. "I heard whispers back in town. They said you were once a trapper and a prospector, but something changed you." "Something did," Boone agreed, rising to add more wood to the fire. "But that's a story for another time. Right now, you need rest." He took down his old buffalo robe from its peg on the wall, the fur still thick and warm despite its years. As he draped it over her, Alice caught the scent of wood smoke and pine needles worked deep into the leather. "Thank you," she whispered, already drifting toward sleep. "For saving me." "Wasn't me," Boone replied quietly. "The Lord guided your feet here, same as he guided mine to this ridge all those years ago. Rest easy now. You're under his watch." The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, peace settled like a blessing. As Alice slipped into deeper sleep, her dreams were filled with strange sounds, the echo of infant cries carried on the wind, two voices raised as one through the swirling snow. She didn't know then what those dreams meant, couldn't see the path God was laying before her feet. But even in sleep, something in her heart recognized the sound of promise. Boone kept his vigil by the fire, watching over her rest while his thoughts turned to the past. He knew too well how the mountain could take lives in winter, how quickly hope could freeze in a heart. But he also knew about second chances, about mercy falling soft as snow to cover old wounds. Perhaps that's why God had sent this girl to his door, not just to save her, but to remind him that even the longest night must yield to dawn. The wind howled louder, rattling the cabin's bones, but neither sleeper nor watcher paid it any mind. They were safe, warm, and, though they didn't know it yet, exactly where they needed to be as God's plan for them began to unfold. Alice shifted in her sleep, pulling the buffalo robe closer. Even in dreams, she could feel the difference between this shelter and all the false ones that had come before. Here was real sanctuary, not just from the storm outside, but from the storms that had driven her all her life. Her body began to truly relax for the first time in years, knowing at last what it meant to be truly safe. Boone watched the peace settle over her face and offered up another quiet prayer of thanks. He'd lived alone on this ridge for so long, carrying his guilt and grief like stones in his pockets. Now, watching this young girl sleep beneath his buffalo robe, he felt something shift inside him, like spring ice breaking up after a long winter's freeze. The night deepened around them, but in that cabin on 10 Mile Ridge, a light burned steady and warm, keeping watch over two souls brought together by providence and grace. Neither could know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, they had found shelter from the storm. Both the one that raged outside and the ones that had driven them to this moment. Alice woke to the familiar aroma of coffee bubbling in a tin pot. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the warmth of the buffalo robe and the steady crackle of the fireplace. The storm outside hadn't lessened. If anything, it sounded angrier, howling around the cabin's corners like a trapped beast. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she spotted Thatcher Boone's massive form nearby. He sat on a rough-hewn stool, his hunting knife gliding smoothly across a piece of pine, turning it into kindling. The sharp blade caught the firelight, and sudden fear gripped her heart. Her breath hitched, and she pulled back against the wall. Boone noticed her movement. Without looking up, he set down his knife and stepped back, giving her space. "You're safe, girl," he said softly, his voice gentle as summer rain. "No harm will come to you here." Alice's racing heart began to slow. There was something in his tone that rang true, something she'd never heard in Preacher Dawson's honeyed lies. She pushed herself up to sitting, keeping the buffalo robe wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Coffee's hot," Boone said, moving to the fireplace. "Reckon you could use some warming from the inside out." He poured the dark liquid into 2 tin cups, then added a spoonful of precious sugar to hers. "Got some cornbread, too, if you're up to eating." Her stomach answered with an embarrassing growl, and the ghost of a smile touched Boone's scarred face. He brought her the cup and a plate with golden cornbread, then settled back on his stool, giving her plenty of room. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the storm providing all the conversation needed. Alice couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so safe. The word itself seemed strange in her mind, like a foreign language she was just learning to speak. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice stronger than it had been the night before. "For saving my life, for—" She gestured at the food, the warmth, everything. Boone nodded, his eyes distant. "Used to be a trapper," he said slowly, as if the words were hard to find. "Made my living taking life from God's creatures. Was good at it, too. Too good, maybe. Pride's a deadly sin, they say, and I had my share." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his huge hands. "Had a wife once, Sarah, and 2 girls, just starting to toddle about." His voice grew thick. "Storm came up sudden-like, worse than this one. I was 2 days out on my trap line when it hit. By the time I made it back—" He stopped, unable to continue. Alice's heart ached for the pain she saw in his face. "How long ago?" she asked softly. 5 years this winter," he replied. "Quit trapping after that. Couldn't bear to take another life, not even a beaver's. Started reading my Bible instead, trying to understand why the Lord would—" He shook his head. "Been up here alone ever since, except when I trade for supplies in town." "Is that why you saved me?" Alice asked. "Because of them?" Boone set his cup down carefully. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe the Lord ain't done teaching me mercy. Figure he sends us the lessons we need if we've got eyes to see them." Alice looked down at her empty plate. "I haven't got anyone now," she whispered. "No protector, no family name worth claiming. Preacher Dawson made sure of that." What happened next would stay with her forever. Boone set aside his coffee and knelt before her, not too close, but near enough that she could see the absolute conviction in his eyes. "By winter," he declared, his voice shaking with something that wasn't desire, but felt like revelation, "you'll birth me twins. The Lord took mine, and he's sending 'em back through you." Alice stared at him, stunned. In another man's mouth, such words might have terrified her. But there was nothing lustful in Boone's tone, only a reverent certainty that shook her to her core. She felt tears spring to her eyes as something deep within her recognized the truth of his words. "How—" she began, but couldn't finish. How could he know? How could he be so sure? "The Lord speaks clear when we're ready to hear," Boone said simply. "Been waiting 5 years for him to show me why he took my girls. Now I reckon I know. They were just being held in trust till you came along." Alice wept then, not from fear or sorrow, but from a strange mixture of wonder and relief. She felt as if she'd been walking in darkness for years, and suddenly a door had opened onto dawn. "Thank you," she whispered again. But this time she wasn't just thanking him for shelter. As dusk began to gather outside the cabin windows, exhaustion crept over her again. The warmth of the fire, the fullness in her belly, and the profound sense of being exactly where she was meant to be all combined to make her eyelids heavy. Boone noticed her fatigue and rose from his knees. "Rest now," he said, adjusting the buffalo robe around her shoulders. "You're safe here." As Alice drifted off to sleep, she heard him begin to pray aloud. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder, but comforting instead of threatening. "Lord," he said, "you know I ain't much for promises anymore, not since Sarah and the girls. But I'm making one now. I swear before you and all your angels that I'll never harm this girl. Never raise a hand to her, never sell her papers, never treat her as anything but the blessing you've sent her to be." The prayer continued, but Alice was already floating away on waves of peaceful sleep. In her dreams, she heard those twin cries again, closer now, more distinct. But this time, instead of echoing through the bitter cold, they seemed to be coming from a warm place, a safe place, a future that was starting to take shape like dawn breaking over snowy peaks. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows, casting pale squares on the rough-hewn floor. Alice sat cross-legged by the hearth, watching as Boone demonstrated how to use the heavy stone grinding wheel. His massive hands dwarfed the corn kernels he dropped into the center hole. "Ain't complicated," he said, turning the handle with practiced ease. "But there's a rhythm to it. Too fast and the meal flies everywhere. Too slow and you'll be working till sundown." Golden dust sifted down into the waiting bowl as he worked. "Your turn." Alice took the handle, surprised by its weight. Her first few turns were awkward, jerky. Corn kernels skittered across the floor. "Steady now," Boone encouraged. "Like this." He placed his hand over hers, careful, respectful, to show her the proper motion. "There you go. Feel that rhythm?" She nodded, gaining confidence with each turn. The simple task felt good, purposeful. After days of running, of fear and confusion, the ordinary work anchored her to the present moment. "I was always hungry," she said softly, almost to herself. "At the preacher's house. He'd lock up the pantry when he went to town, leave me nothing but dry bread." The words spilled out before she could stop them. Boone's face darkened, but his voice remained gentle. "Ain't right, using hunger to control folks. The good book says to feed the hungry, not starve them." He paused, then added, "There'll always be food here. Might not be fancy, but you won't go hungry again." After the grinding was done, Boone led her up to the cabin's low loft. Wind whistled through small gaps in the roof, boards. "Storms damaged some of the shingles," he explained. "Need to patch these holes before the next big blow." He showed her how to cut strips of canvas and seal them with pine pitch. The work was sticky and awkward, but Alice threw herself into it, determined to learn. When her fingers fumbled with a particularly stubborn patch, Boone didn't criticize. He just demonstrated again, patient as summer sunshine. "Used to trap all through these mountains," he said as they worked. "Thought I was master of everything I saw. Pride, plain and simple." He shook his head. "Took losing everything to learn different." "What changed?" Alice asked, pressing another patch into place. "Started seeing God's creatures different. Not just pelts to be took, but his creation to be respected." He was quiet for a moment. "Been trying to earn my way back to grace ever since, though I reckon that ain't how it works." When they finished the roof, Boone climbed down first, then helped Alice descend the ladder. As she reached the bottom rung, he turned to a wooden chest in the corner. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled out a faded wool shawl, soft gray like dove feathers. "Was Sarah's," he said gruffly. "My wife's. You look to be feeling the cold, and—" He held it out, his face tight with memory. Alice touched the worn fabric reverently. "Are you sure?" He nodded once, sharp and quick, then turned away. But not before she saw his expression soften, like ice beginning to thaw. As evening approached, haunting howls echoed down from the ridgeline. Alice tensed, but Boone just reached for his rifle with practiced calm. "Wolves," he explained, "getting bold with the deep snow." He stepped onto the cabin's small porch, rifle ready. But when the wolves called again, closer now, he simply fired once into the air. The report crashed through the gathering dusk, and the howling retreated. "Don't need more blood on my hands," he muttered, coming back inside. Setting the rifle in its place by the door, he knelt by his bed and began to pray, his voice too low for Alice to make out the words. She watched him, understanding now that his great strength masked an equal measure of guilt and grief. The cabin had begun to darken, so Alice lit the oil lamp and hung it from its hook. Together they prepared a simple supper of bean soup and the morning's cornbread. When Alice ladled the steaming soup into their tin cups, she whispered grace without thinking. "Thank you, Lord, for this food and shelter." Boone looked up, surprised but pleased. "Amen," he added softly. Outside, snow was falling again, thick and silent. The wind had picked up too, making the cabin's timbers creak. Boone rose and added another solid log to the fire, arranging it carefully for maximum heat. "Winter don't end quick up here," he said, settling back onto his stool. "But we'll make it through." The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm. Each morning brought new lessons in frontier craft. Boone showed her how to split kindling without cutting herself, how to bank the fire so it would last through the night, how to patch worn clothing with neat, strong stitches. "Ain't teaching you these things to make you feel beholden," he explained one afternoon as he demonstrated how to cure leather. "Need to know you can manage on your own if something happens to me." Alice understood then. He wasn't trying to keep her dependent, but to make her capable. It was so different from Preacher Dawson's controlling ways that she felt tears prick her eyes. They worked side by side through the short winter days. Boone chopped wood, while Alice learned to cook over the open hearth. She mended their clothes while he cleaned his rifle or repaired tools. Sometimes they talked, him about the mountains he knew so well, her about the Bible stories she remembered from childhood, before everything went wrong. Other times they worked in comfortable silence, broken only by the pop of the fire or the whisper of needle through cloth. The fear that had been Alice's constant companion began to fade, replaced by something new and fragile. Trust, born not of words but of small kindnesses. A cup of coffee appearing at her elbow when she was tired. An extra blanket on cold nights. The way Boone always announced himself before entering a room, giving her space to feel safe. And through it all, an unspoken understanding grew between them. This wasn't just about survival, but about redemption. His from the guilt of his past, hers from the shadow of abuse. They were becoming something more than reluctant companions. Not quite family, not yet, but perhaps something like spiritual kin, brought together by God's mysterious purpose. The twins Boone had prophesied remained unspoken of, but their promise hung in the air like the echo of distant bells. Alice found herself touching her flat stomach sometimes, wondering, not with fear, but with a strange sense of anticipation, as if she too were beginning to believe in miracles. That evening, as the fire burned low and the wind sang its endless winter song, Alice realized she felt truly at peace for the first time in years. She looked across at Boone, his scarred face softened by firelight, and knew she wasn't alone in this feeling. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, guided by faith and strengthened by trust that grew deeper with each passing day. A week passed like water flowing beneath winter ice. The days grew shorter, and the snow piled deeper around Boone's cabin. Though food wasn't scarce, Boone had prepared well for winter. They needed fresh provisions to supplement their stored supplies. "Creek might still have some rose hips frozen on the bushes," Boone said one crisp morning. "Could do with some willow bark too for medicine." He pulled on his thick leather gloves and grabbed his foraging bag. "Best you come along, learn the way of it." Alice nodded, wrapping herself in Sarah's shawl and the warm coat Boone had given her. The morning air bit sharp when they stepped outside, making her catch her breath. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, turning the world pristine white. They trudged through knee-deep drifts, Boone breaking trail ahead while teaching Alice to recognize landmarks even when covered in snow. "See that lightning-struck pine? Remember it. Creek's just beyond, running south to north." The frozen creek lay silent under its blanket of white, but Boone knew where to look for the plants they sought. He showed Alice how to spot the dark red berries of rose hips standing out against the snow, and how to carefully strip bark from young willow branches. "Lord provides, even in winter," he said, helping her fill her gathering bag. "Just gotta know where to look." They worked their way downstream, the only sounds their breathing and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. Alice had just spotted another cluster of rose hips when Boone suddenly stopped, his body going still as stone. "There," he said softly, pointing to an odd shape half buried in the snow near the creek bank. "Something ain't right." As they drew closer, Alice's heart began to pound. The shape resolved itself into a crude wooden box, like a small trunk or chest, partially covered by fresh fallen snow. It looked recently placed, with broken branches and disturbed snow around it. Boone approached cautiously, rifle ready, until he could see the box clearly. "It's a lady's travel chest," he said, voice tight with concern. He brushed away snow, revealing brass hinges and a simple latch. "Should we open it?" Alice whispered. Boone nodded grimly. "Might be someone needs help." Together they pried open the frozen latch. The lid creaked back, and Alice gasped. Inside lay a woman, no older than 30, curled protectively around two tiny bundles. Her face was pale as the snow around her breathing shallow and labored. But it was the bundles that made Alice's hands fly to her mouth. Two newborn baby girls, wrapped in what looked like pieces of a wool dress, their small faces red from cold but still moving, still alive. The woman's eyes fluttered open at the sound of their approach. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please help them." Boone knelt beside the box, his big hands gentle as he checked the babies. "They're alive, praise God, but cold as winter birds." He looked at the woman, his face grave. "Ma'am, what happened to you?" "Soldiers," she managed, each word a struggle. "Burned our wagon, the ledger, had to hide it." She broke off, coughing weakly. "Easy now," Alice soothed, taking one of the woman's cold hands. "We'll help you." But the woman shook her head, using her remaining strength to grip Boone's sleeve. "Promise me," she pleaded. "Promise you'll keep them safe. The ledger shows what they did, stealing rations." Her voice faded to a whisper. "Promise." "I promise before God and heaven," Boone said solemnly. "These little ones will be protected." Look of peace crossed the woman's face. She tried to smile, then shuddered once and went still. Fresh snow began to fall, dusting her features with white. Boone stayed kneeling for a long moment, his big frame shaking. "By heaven," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "The Lord meant his word." He looked up at Alice, wonder and grief mingling in his expression. "The twins, he promised. They're here." Alice was already moving, shrugging off her cloak to wrap the infants more securely. Their tiny cries, weak but determined, pierced her heart. "They're so cold," she said. "We need to get them warm right away." Boone nodded, gathering himself. "I'll carry their mama. You keep those babies close to your body heat." He lifted the woman's body from the box with infinite gentleness. "We'll give her a proper burial soon as we get these little ones seen to." The walk back to the cabin seemed endless. Alice clutched the babies to her chest, speaking softly to them, while Boone carried their mother's body through the deepening snow. The wind picked up, driving the fresh flakes into their faces, but they pressed on. Finally, the cabin appeared through the swirling white. They hurried inside, where Boone had kept the fire burning hot. Alice immediately settled by the hearth, unwrapping the babies to check them properly in the warm light. "They're perfect," she breathed, counting tiny fingers and toes, small but strong. The infants' cries grew stronger in the warmth, their faces scrunching with healthy vigor. Boone had laid the woman's body reverently on his bed and covered her with a blanket. Now he knelt beside Alice, his weathered face soft with wonder as he looked at the babies. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said quietly. "When I spoke of twins coming, I never imagined—" "What do we do now?" Alice asked, cradling one baby while Boone carefully held the other. "First we warm them proper and get some goat's milk in their bellies," he said. "Then, when the snow lets up some, we'll lay their mama to rest." He paused, looking down at the tiny face against his chest. "She died protecting them. Least we can do is honor that sacrifice." They spent the next hours caring for the infants, warming them gradually and feeding them droppers of warmed milk. The babies responded well, their color improving and their cries growing stronger. Alice found herself falling naturally into the role of mother, while Boone showed surprising skill at handling the delicate newborns. "Had twin girls once," he said simply when she commented on it. "Some things you don't forget." When the snowfall finally eased, they wrapped the woman's body carefully and carried her to a spot Boone chose behind the ridge. The ground was frozen solid, but Boone had experience digging winter graves. He worked steadily while Alice stayed in the cabin with the babies, emerging only when it was time for the burial. They stood together in the falling snow while Boone read from his old Bible, his voice strong and clear. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Alice wiped tears from her cheeks as the familiar words of the 23rd Psalm rolled over them. The babies slept peacefully in their makeshift cradle nearby, wrapped warm against the cold. When the grave was filled and marked with a wooden cross, they returned to the cabin's warmth. The twins were starting to stir, their small voices demanding attention. Alice lifted them both, marveling at how natural it felt already. Boone watched them, his expression thoughtful. "They need names," he said finally. "Proper ones, to mark their new beginning." Alice looked up at him, remembering his words about names being remade in God's sight. "Did you have something in mind?" He nodded slowly. "Mercy and Grace," he whispered, reaching out to touch each tiny head in turn. "That's what we'll call them, for they're living proof of both." Alice felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy mixed with the sadness. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Mercy and Grace Boone." The babies seemed to approve, settling contentedly against her. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, warmth and new life flourished. God's purpose, mysterious but clear, had brought them all together in this place, in this moment. Boone's prophecy had come true, though not in any way they could have imagined. Now they were bound together. The mountain man seeking redemption, the girl fleeing abuse, and two tiny souls entrusted to their care. Their path forward wouldn't be easy, but they would walk it together, guided by faith and strengthened by the miracle they had witnessed in the snow. The morning after the burial, Boone strapped on his snowshoes and grabbed his walking stick. "Them babies need milk," he said simply. "Got a neighbor 2 miles down trail keeps goats. Reckon I can work out a trade." Alice stood by the window, cradling both infants. "Will you be safe in this weather?" "Done worse." He pulled his wool scarf tighter. "Keep the fire hot. I'll be back before dark." The twins fussed as he left, their tiny faces scrunching with hunger. Alice paced the cabin floor, humming fragments of hymns she remembered from childhood. "Hush now, little ones," she whispered. "Your papa will bring food soon." The word papa surprised her, but it felt right. Already these precious girls had bound them together in ways she couldn't explain. Hours passed like molasses. Alice changed the babies with scraps of soft cloth, warmed them by the fire, and prayed quietly over their downy heads. When the cabin door finally creaked open, her heart leaped. Boone stumbled in, snow-covered and breathing hard. His cheeks and nose were white with frostbite, but his eyes shone with triumph. From his pack, he pulled a sealed jug of fresh goat's milk. "Old Williams drove a hard bargain," he panted, stamping snow from his boots. "Had to promise him 2 deer hides come spring, but we got it." Alice hurried to warm the milk, while Boone thawed his frozen hands by the fire. Soon, both babies were suckling contentedly from cloth-wrapped bottlenecks they'd fashioned from old medicine vials. "You're a natural at that," Boone observed softly. Alice smiled down at the nursing infants. "They make it easy. They're such good babies." That night brought their first real test as a family. Mercy woke crying at midnight, which started Grace fussing too. Alice changed them both while Boone heated milk over the fire. They took turns walking the floor, speaking soft words of comfort into the dark. Near dawn, Alice found herself humming again, an old lullaby about angels watching over sleeping children. The melody came back piece by piece, like spring flowers pushing through snow. "That's pretty," Boone said from his chair by the fire. "Reminds me of something my Caroline used to sing." Alice saw the flash of old pain cross his face at mentioning his dead wife's name. But there was something else there too now, a gentle acceptance, as if the twins were helping heal that ancient wound. The next day, Boone began work on proper cradles. He chose 2 straight pine logs, splitting and hollowing them with careful axe strokes. Alice watched him shape the wood, his big hands surprisingly delicate on the smaller details. "My pa taught me woodworking," he explained, sanding smooth edges with a piece of bark. "Said every child deserves a proper place to lay their head." When the cradles were finished, he mounted them on curved rockers and placed them near the fire. Alice laid the sleeping twins in their new beds, marveling at how peaceful they looked. "They need something else," Boone muttered. He took out his carving knife and worked quietly for an hour. When he finished, 2 small wooden crosses hung above the cradles. "A promise," he said simply, "to protect them always." The days fell into a rhythm. Alice learned to tell the twins' cries apart, Mercy's sharp and demanding, Grace's softer but more persistent. Boone made endless trips for milk and firewood, the cabin filled with new sounds, baby gurgles, gentle lullabies, quiet prayers. One night, during a late feeding, Alice found herself opening up to Boone. "At the preacher's house," she whispered, "I got beaten once for praying out loud. He said women should keep silent before God." Boone's face darkened with anger, but his voice stayed gentle. Then pray twice as loud now, girl. The Lord made your voice same as any man's. Alice nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Then and there, she began praying aloud, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger. Boone joined in, his deep rumble harmonizing with her lighter tones, while the twins slept peacefully between them. The snow kept falling, sealing them in their mountain sanctuary. But instead of feeling trapped, Alice found herself treasuring the isolation. Here, surrounded by warmth and new life, she was healing. They all were. Boone seemed to sense the change, too. One morning, he announced he was going to rebuild the old smokehouse that had collapsed years ago. "Ain't no harm in preparing for spring," he said, hauling logs through the snow. "Come warm weather, we'll need space for preserving meat and storing supplies." Alice watched him work from the cabin window, bouncing Grace while Mercy slept. The sight of him planning for their future made her heart swell with gratitude. That evening, as they sat by the fire with sleeping babies between them, Alice realized something profound had shifted. They weren't just survivors anymore, thrown together by circumstance and prophecy. They were becoming a family, bound by love and faith, and tiny fingers wrapped around their hearts. The snow outside might be deep, but hope ran deeper. Spring would come, and they would meet it together. Their little family forged in winter's crucible, but warming now in Grace's gentle thaw. Boone looked up from his whittling. He was making tiny wooden animals for the twins, and caught her watching him. "You all right there, Alice?" She smiled, touching the cross above Mercy's cradle. "Just thinking how the Lord works in mysterious ways." "That he does," Boone agreed softly. "That he surely does." Outside, the wind sang through pine boughs heavy with snow. Inside, the fire crackled. Twins dreamed, and peace wrapped around them like a warm blanket, a gift from the God who had brought them all together on this mountain. The days melted together like snowflakes on warm glass. Alice fell into the steady rhythm of frontier life, feeding the twins at dawn, helping Boone with endless chores, praying over meals, and singing lullabies as darkness crept back across the mountain. Winter's fury seemed determined to test their resolve, howling through every crack in the cabin walls. One particularly bitter evening, while Boone stoked the fire and Alice nursed the babies, thunder cracked overhead, a rare sound in midwinter. The twins startled at the noise, their tiny faces scrunching in distress. "Hush now," Alice soothed, but her own voice trembled. She'd never heard thunder so loud, as if the sky itself was splitting apart. Boone moved to the window, his massive frame silhouetted against the darkness. "Lightning in winter ain't natural," he muttered. "Something's wrong." The words had barely left his mouth when a blinding flash lit up the night. The crack that followed shook the entire cabin. Through the window they watched in horror as lightning struck a towering pine on the ridge above, the same ridge that sheltered their only trail to the lower valley. The ancient tree exploded in a shower of splinters and flame. For one terrible moment, its burning trunk illuminated the mountainside like a torch. Then came a sound that made Alice's blood run cold, a deep, hollow rumbling that seemed to rise from the earth itself. "Avalanche!" Boone shouted. "Get the babies away from the window!" Alice scrambled backward, clutching Mercy and Grace to her chest. The rumbling grew louder, and the cabin trembled as tons of snow and debris thundered past. When silence finally fell, Boone lit a lantern and peered outside. "Trail's gone," he said grimly, "buried under 20 feet of snow and timber." Alice's heart sank. "The goat." "William's old nanny," Boone finished. "Our milk supply." He was already pulling on his heavy coat. "Can't let her freeze down there." "You can't go alone," Alice protested. Not in this darkness." Boone paused at the door. "Them babies need milk. Ain't no choice in it." But Alice was already wrapping the twins in extra blankets. "We'll all go. They'll stay warmer against my body, and you'll need help digging." Something like pride flickered in Boone's eyes. He nodded once, then helped her secure the babies in a sling across her chest, covered by his old buffalo robe. The night air bit at their faces as they made their way down to where the trail should have been. Only the top of William's lean-to was visible above the snow. Inside, they could hear frightened bleating. "Lord have mercy," Boone breathed, seeing the magnitude of their task. Then he unslung his shovel and began to dig. They worked for hours in the darkness. Boone attacked the packed snow with his shovel, while Alice used a pot lid as a makeshift tool, scraping away what she could while keeping the twins warm against her. Her arms ached and her fingers grew numb, but she refused to stop. Every few minutes, she could feel the babies stirring against her, their warmth giving her strength to continue. The old nanny goat's cries grew stronger as they got closer. Finally, Boone's shovel broke through to the lean-to's interior. The goat scrambled out through the hole, shaking snow from her coat. She seemed unharmed, if rattled. By the time they got back to the cabin, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Alice's legs felt like water, and even Boone's broad shoulders sagged with exhaustion. They collapsed beside the twins' cradle, too tired to even remove their wet clothes. "Psalm 91, Boone said suddenly, his voice rough with fatigue. "My ma always read it in storms." He began to recite from memory. "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." Alice joined in, her trembling alto harmonizing with his gravelly bass. "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust." Their voices twined together in the pre-dawn darkness, gaining strength as they continued through the ancient words of comfort. The twins slept peacefully, undisturbed by their parents' impromptu hymn. As they finished the psalm, the first rays of morning sun broke over the snowfields, painting the white world in shades of rose and gold. Alice stood on shaky legs and made her way to the window. "It's beautiful," she whispered, watching the light transform the destruction into something almost holy. "I feel like I'm seeing everything new, like I'm reborn in this white world." She turned to find Boone watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, something almost like a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Without a word, he crossed to the shelf where he kept his most precious possessions and took down an old, leather-bound Bible. The book's pages were worn soft with use, its corners rounded from years of handling. Boone settled into his chair by the fire and began to read in his deep, steady voice. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Alice gathered the twins and sat nearby, letting his words wash over her. The warmth of the fire, the familiar cadence of Scripture, and the weight of the babies in her arms soon had her eyelids growing heavy. She dozed, drifting in and out of consciousness, aware of Boone's voice continuing steadily through the ancient text. Through half-closed eyes, she caught him looking at her and the twins. The expression on his weathered face made her heart catch. It was the look of a man seeing ghosts made flesh, as if his lost family had somehow returned to him through them. There was pain in his eyes, yes, but also something else. Peace, perhaps, or acceptance. Outside the cabin, a pair of ravens circled in the morning sky. Boone watched them through the window, his reading falling silent. In the old ways he'd learned from mountain men and native traders, ravens were messengers, harbingers of death when they landed, but signs of peace when they merely passed over. The blackbirds wheeled once more against the brilliant snowlight, then flew on without alighting. Boone nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself, and returned to his reading. The cabin settled into comfortable silence, broken only by the soft breathing of the sleeping twins and the occasional pop from the fireplace. The storm had passed, leaving them changed, stronger together than they had been apart, their faith tested and proven in the crucible of that long night's labor. Alice stirred, adjusting Mercy's blanket. "Thank you," she murmured, not sure if Boone could hear. "For everything." His only response was to turn another page and continue reading, but the peace in his eyes spoke volumes. Outside, the sun climbed higher over their mountain sanctuary, making the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds across the transformed landscape. March brought the first whispers of spring to 10 Mile Ridge. The endless white began to crack and shift, releasing rivulets of crystal-clear meltwater that trickled down the mountainside. The sound of dripping became a constant companion, marking time like nature's own clock. One crisp morning, Boone stood at the cabin door, studying the brightening sky. "Reckon it's time we got you walking proper," he said to Alice, who sat nearby nursing Grace while Mercy slept in her cradle. "Babies need fresh air, and your legs need strengthening after winter's confinement." Alice nodded eagerly. The cabin, though a haven, had begun to feel small after months indoors. "I'd like that," she said softly, adjusting Grace's blanket. "Where would we go?" "There's a gentle slope round back of the cabin," Boone replied. "Not too steep for starting out. We'll take it slow." That afternoon, they made their first venture outside. Alice carried Mercy while Boone held Grace, his massive hands impossibly gentle with the tiny infant. The snow had compacted enough to walk on, though Alice's steps were uncertain at first. "Easy now," Boone cautioned, offering his free arm for support. "No rush to it." The air was sharp and clean, carrying the first hints of spring's warmth. Alice breathed deeply, feeling life surge through her winter-weakened limbs. The twins seemed equally enchanted, their eyes wide at this new world of light and shadow. They made these short expeditions daily as March wore on. Each day, Alice grew stronger, more confident in her footing. The twins flourished in the mountain air, their cheeks pink with health. During one such walk, they came across a fallen telegraph pole, half buried in melting snow. Its single wire stretched taut above their heads, humming faintly in the breeze. Alice reached up to touch the wire, feeling its subtle vibration. "It's alive," she whispered, wonder in her voice. "Civilization's voice," Boone grunted, though his tone carried a note of unease. "Reminds us we ain't alone up here, for better or worse." Alice pulled her hand back, suddenly conscious of the world beyond their peaceful mountain sanctuary. The humming wire seemed now like a warning, a reminder of all they'd fled. A week later, that warning proved prophetic. The morning began like any other. Alice was hanging fresh-washed diapers near the fireplace when Boone suddenly stiffened, his head cocked toward the window. "Horses," he said sharply. "2 riders." Through the glass, they could see a pair of mounted men picking their way up the snow-packed trail. Their uniforms marked them as soldiers, their rifles prominent across their saddles. "Root cellar," Boone commanded, already moving to lift the trap door. "Quick and quiet with the babies." Alice didn't hesitate. She gathered the twins, who mercifully remained sleeping, and descended the rough-hewn steps into the cool darkness below. Boone handed down a blanket and a lantern, then closed the trap door above her. Through the floorboards, she could hear heavy boots on the cabin's porch, followed by sharp knocking. "Who's there?" Boone's voice, deliberately gruff. United States Army, came the response. Looking for information about a missing officer's wife and certain government property. Alice's heart thundered so loudly she feared they might hear it through the floor. She clutched the twins closer, willing them to stay quiet. "Ain't seen nobody," Boone replied. "Been snowed in most. Of winter." "Mind if we look around?" A pause, then the sound of boots entering the cabin. Alice held her breath as footsteps moved overhead, punctuated by the sound of furniture being shifted. "Live alone, do you?" one soldier asked, suspicion evident in his tone. "Yep. Looks like you've got women's things here." The voice grew harder. "Care to explain that?" "Belong to my wife," Boone answered flatly. "She's dead 3 years now. Ain't cleared it out yet." More footsteps, more searching. Alice pressed herself into the darkest corner of the cellar, one hand gently covering Mercy's mouth as the baby stirred. "What's in the cellar?" the second soldier asked. "Root vegetables. Ain't much left this late in winter. Welcome to check, but watch for rats." The trapdoor creaked, and a shaft of light penetrated the darkness. Alice froze, hardly daring to breathe. After what seemed like eternity, the door closed again. "Nothing down there but potatoes and dirt," the soldier reported, disgust evident in his voice. More questions followed, each answered by Boone in the same terse manner. Finally, the sound of retreating footsteps, then horses moving away down the trail. Alice waited, counting her heartbeats, until Boone's face appeared at the trapdoor. "They're gone," he said quietly. "For now." She emerged shaking, the twins still miraculously quiet in her arms. Without speaking, she went to the bed and pulled something from beneath her shawl, a leather-bound ledger she'd kept hidden since the day they found the dying woman. "I think this is what they're looking for," she said, her voice trembling. I've been reading it, when you were out checking traps. It's records of ration theft from the Ute Reservation. Names, dates, amounts, everything documented by that poor woman." Boone took the ledger, his expression grim as he thumbed through its pages. "Army officers selling Indian supplies for profit," he muttered, "while folks starve." He closed the book with a snap. No wonder they killed her for it. "What do we do?" Alice asked, gently laying the twins in their cradle. Boone stood at the window, staring down the trail where the soldiers had disappeared. "Truth's heavier than gold," he said finally. "Them soldiers will be back, count on it, and next time they won't be so easily turned away." Alice moved to stand beside him, watching the late March sun glint off the melting snow. Everything they'd built over the winter, their safety, their peace, their makeshift family, suddenly felt as fragile as spring ice. "Could we run?" she whispered. Boone shook his head slowly. "Running ain't the answer. Them babies deserve better than a life of hiding, and them Ute families deserve justice." He turned to face her, his expression softened by something like pride. "You did right, keeping this safe. Now we got to decide what's right to do with it." Alice looked at the twins, sleeping peacefully in their cradle, unaware of the danger gathering around them. She thought of their mother, dying in the snow to protect this truth. "Whatever we decide," she said firmly, "we decide together." Boone nodded, a quiet respect in his eyes. They stood there as evening shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, the weight of truth settling heavy on their shoulders, waiting for darkness to fall. Dawn crept over 10 Mile Ridge, painting the snow-draped peaks in soft rose and gold. Inside the cabin, Alice stirred the fire back to life, while Boone brought the leather-bound ledger to the table. They sat close together in the dim light of an oil lamp, the twins sleeping nearby in their cradle. "Best we know exactly what we're protecting," Boone said quietly, opening the worn cover. The lamplight flickered across pages filled with neat columns of numbers and names. Alice leaned forward, her finger tracing down a row of entries. "Look here," she whispered. 200 pounds of flour, marked as delivered to Standing Rock Camp. She flipped to another page. But here, the same delivery is listed as 400 pounds in the official record. Boone's massive hands clenched into fists as he studied the numbers. "Double booking," he growled. "Write down one amount for the Army records, deliver half that to the people, sell the rest for profit." His voice grew hoarse with shame. "I seen it happen, when I was scouts for the Army." Alice looked up at him, seeing pain etched deep in the lines of his face. "Tell me," she said softly. Boone stared into the lamp's flame, lost in memory. "Was 3 winters back. I was guiding a supply train to the Ute winter camp. Children came running out to meet us, skin and bones they was, belly starved." He drew a shaking breath. "Their mothers told us they'd had no flour, no corn for weeks, but the officers, they just waved their papers, claiming full deliveries had been made." "What did you do?" Alice asked, touching his arm gently. "Nothing." The word came out like stones dropping. "Stood there silent while they lied. Quit the Army next day, but that don't wash the sin away." He looked down at the ledger, his voice growing fierce. "This here's proof of what I couldn't prove then. Names, dates, false tallies. Everything them children's mothers said was true." Alice studied the pages with new understanding. "The woman who died, she must have been copying these records, building evidence." "And they killed her for it," Boone said grimly. "Burned her wagon, hunted her through the snow, left them babies orphaned." He closed the ledger carefully. "Now it's our turn to carry this truth." "We have to get it to someone who can help," Alice insisted, her voice strengthening with purpose. "A preacher or a judge, someone who'll make this known." Boone nodded slowly. "Nearest federal judge is in Denver. But we can't travel yet. Trails are too treacherous with the spring thaw. One wrong step could send a horse leg deep into melting snow, break it clean through." He stood, pacing the cabin's length. "We got to wait till the ground firms up. Maybe 3-4 weeks more." "But the soldiers could come back any day," Alice protested. "That's why we hide it proper." Boone moved to the corner where his bed stood. With his hunting knife, he carefully pried up a floorboard, revealing a narrow space beneath. "Here," he said, "dry and secret." Together they wrapped the ledger in oilcloth and sealed it with twine. Alice held the lamp, while Boone lowered their burden into its hiding place. The board went back, fitting so seamlessly no eye could spot its edges. "We swear, then?" Alice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To protect this truth, no matter what comes?" "We swear," Boone answered solemnly, "before God and these innocent ones he's given to our care." As if hearing their names in the promise, the twins began to stir in their cradle. Alice lifted them out, one in each arm, their small faces bright in the strengthening morning light. "Speaking of God's gifts," she said softly, "isn't it time these little ones were properly baptized?" Boone's stern expression softened as he looked at the babies. "Reckon you're right. Been meaning to do it, just needed the right moment." He went to the shelf and took down his old Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. "Tonight, then? At sunset?" Alice nodded, joy brightening her face despite their heavy mourning. "I'll heat fresh water and find clean linens." The day passed in quiet preparation. Boone carefully cleaned and filled the large wash basin they used for laundry. Alice washed the twins' faces and dressed them in the tiny gowns she'd sewn from one of her old petticoats. As evening approached, they placed the basin near the hearth where its water could warm. The sun was setting when they gathered for the ceremony, its last rays painting the cabin's interior in deep gold. Boone stood straight and tall, his Bible open in his hands. Alice held the twins, who seemed to sense the solemnity of the moment in their unusual stillness. "The Lord is my shepherd," Boone began reading, his deep voice filled with reverence. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Alice's clear voice joined his. "He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake." Together they recited the entire 23rd Psalm, its ancient words of comfort filling the cabin. Then Boone set aside the Bible and took Mercy into his arms. With infinite gentleness, he dipped his hand in the warm water and let it flow over the baby's forehead. "I baptize you, Mercy Boone," he declared, "in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost." He repeated the sacred gesture with grace, his voice growing thick with emotion as he spoke her name. Then, in a movement that caught Alice's breath, he lifted both infants high above his head, their tiny forms outlined against the cabin's ceiling beams. "These are God's daughters," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with authority, "not man's chattel. By his grace they came to us, and by his strength we'll protect them." Alice wiped tears from her cheeks as Boone lowered the babies back into her arms. Outside, snow had begun falling again. Soft, thick flakes that drifted past the window like feathers. The sight of it made her shiver, remembering another snowy night when she'd fled here with nothing but fear and desperation. Now she stood in the same cabin, holding two precious lives, sharing a sacred purpose with this gentle giant of a man. The snow continued its relentless dance, as if nature itself was witnessing their commitment to truth and justice. Boone stepped to the window, watching the white curtain thicken. "Storm's moving in," he said quietly. "Might be the last big one of winter." Alice nodded, rocking the drowsy twins. Like the hidden ledger beneath their feet, the snow's burden felt both beautiful and dangerous, a reminder that truth, like winter, must be endured with patience and courage until spring's thaw finally came. The April sun had melted most of the snow from 10 Mile Ridge, leaving patches of mud and new grass between lingering drifts. Inside the cabin, Alice hummed softly while she folded fresh linens, the twins cooing in their cradle nearby. Boone stood at the window, his massive frame tense as he watched 5 riders approach through the morning mist. "Soldiers," he growled, turning quickly. "Same ones as before, plus 3 more. Get down to the root cellar with the little ones." Alice scooped up the twins, her heart pounding. "The ledger." "I'll hide it," Boone assured her, already prying up the loose floorboard. He retrieved the oilcloth-wrapped package and strode to the hearth. With practiced movements, he lifted one of the heavy hearthstones and tucked the ledger into the hollow beneath. Alice hurried down the cellar steps, pressing Mercy and Grace close to quiet their worried whimpers. Above, she heard bootsteps on the porch, then sharp knocking. "Open up, Boone!" a harsh voice commanded. "Army business!" The cabin door creaked open. "What brings you back to my mountain?" Boone's voice was carefully neutral. "New information about that missing woman," the soldier replied. "Lieutenant says to search the whole property this time." Heavy footsteps moved through the cabin. Alice held her breath, rocking the twins gently. A floorboard groaned directly overhead. "Sir," another voice called from outside. "Found something behind the ridge." Alice's blood ran cold. The woman's grave. The first soldier's voice turned dangerous. "Care to explain that fresh-turned earth out back, Boone? Looking mighty like a grave to my eyes." "That's my business," Boone answered quietly. "Your business," the soldier sneered. "Or murder? Where's that woman you were hiding last time? And those babies we heard crying?" "I live alone." Lying dog! There was a sudden scuffle, the sound of furniture crashing. Arrest him! The cabin erupted in violence. Alice heard Boone's roar of resistance, the thud of bodies against walls, breaking crockery. Then came the sickening crack of wood striking flesh, and a heavy fall that shook dust from the cellar ceiling. "Search everything!" the leader ordered. "Tear it apart!" Footsteps thundered overhead. Alice pressed herself into the darkest corner, but it was no use. Light flooded the cellar as the door was yanked open. "Here they are!" a soldier shouted triumphantly. "The woman and 2 babies!" Rough hands dragged Alice up the ladder. She emerged into chaos, upended furniture, scattered belongings, and Boone lying motionless on the floor, blood matting his hair where they'd struck him. "Boone!" she cried, struggling against the soldier's grip. He stirred slightly, eyes flickering open. Their gazes met for one desperate moment before a soldier shoved her towards the door. "Get them in the wagon," the leader ordered. He turned to 2 others. "Burn it. Burn everything. Let him watch his world turn to ash." "No," Alice screamed as they forced her outside. The twins wailed in terror as smoke began curling from the cabin's windows. "Please, he's done nothing wrong." They ignored her pleas, shoving her into a waiting wagon. Through her tears, she saw flames licking up the cabin's walls. Boone had somehow dragged himself to his knees in the doorway, blood streaming down his face as he reached towards them. "Alice!" His anguished cry followed them as the wagon lurched forward. The soldiers spurred their horses, leaving Boone behind in the thickening smoke. Alice clutched the twins, trying to shield their eyes from the sight of their home burning against the morning sky. The wagon jounced down the muddy trail, each bump driving splinters of fear deeper into her heart. Back at the ridge, Boone fought to stay conscious. The world spun sickeningly as he crawled away from the inferno that had been his cabin. The heat seared his back, smoke stung his eyes, but he kept moving until he reached the creek. He plunged his head into the icy water, letting it wash away the blood and clear his thoughts. The cold helped dull the throbbing pain where they'd struck him. He cupped handful after handful over his face and neck, praying through cracked lips. "Lord," he gasped, "give me strength. Don't let them harm those innocent ones." The cabin collapsed behind him with a tremendous crash, sending sparks swirling heavenward like angry fireflies. Boone watched them rise, remembering another night when sparks had danced in darkness, the night Alice had first arrived, when God's plan had begun unfolding. As darkness fell, he gathered what strength remained. From the smoking ruins, he pulled a length of charred timber and another shorter piece. With trembling hands, he lashed them together with a strip torn from his shirt, forming a crude cross. Planting it in the softening spring earth, Boone knelt before it. "I swear by your holy name," he whispered hoarsely. "I'll find them. Whatever it costs, however far I must go, I'll bring them home." He stayed there through the bitter night, alternately praying and planning. The soldiers would expect him to follow directly, so he'd need to be smarter than that. They'd likely head for Fort Laramie, where the crooked officers named in the ledger were stationed. But they'd avoid the main trails, keeping to back routes where they wouldn't have to explain their prisoners. As false dawn began painting the eastern sky, a familiar sound caught his attention. The harsh cry of ravens echoed across the ridge. Boone raised his head, remembering how he'd seen the same birds circling during the winter storm, harbingers of God's grace rather than death. 3 ravens wheeled overhead, their black wings stark against the lightening sky. As Boone watched, they banked sharply and glided toward the mountain pass that led to the eastern plains. "Show me the way," he murmured, struggling to his feet. His head still pounded, but purpose drove him forward. He gathered what supplies he could salvage from the ruins. His rifle, miraculously unburnt where it had fallen behind an overturned table. A water skin, some strips of jerky from the root cellar, and his old Bible, its leather cover scorched but its pages intact. The ravens continued circling, waiting as he made ready. When he finally shouldered his rifle and began walking, they flew ahead, leading him toward the pass where Alice and the twins had vanished. Boone's boots crunched through patches of lingering snow as he followed the birds' guidance. Each step was a prayer, each mile a promise. Behind him, thin wisps of smoke still rose from the ashes of his home, curling up to heaven like incense from an altar of sacrifice. But this time, he vowed, the sacrifice would not be innocent lives. This time, justice would prevail. The truth hidden in that ledger would come to light, and those who had profited from others' suffering would answer for their sins. With the ravens showing him the way, Boone set out to reclaim what had been taken. Though his head throbbed and his heart ached, he felt God's presence as surely as he had that winter night when Alice first collapsed at his door. The same providence that had brought them together would not abandon them now. The morning sun rose fully, warming his shoulders as he walked. Ahead, the ravens called their harsh encouragement, leading him onward into uncertainty and hope. Dawn painted the mountains in shades of amber as Boone stumbled toward his lean-to shelter. His faithful horse, Crowfoot, nickered softly, steam rising from its nostrils in the crisp morning air. Above, 3 ravens circled, their black wings catching the first rays of sunlight. "Coming, old friend," Boone muttered, wincing as he gripped the saddle horn. His head still throbbed where the soldiers had struck him, and dried blood matted his hair. With a grunt of pain, he pulled himself onto Crowfoot's broad back. The horse knew these trails well, picking its way carefully through patches of melting snow and loose shale. Boone let the reins hang slack, trusting Crowfoot's sure-footedness more than his own clouded vision. The ravens led the way, calling out harsh warnings when danger lurked near. They passed the ruins of Boone's old trapping grounds. Rusted metal teeth poked through drifts of snow, abandoned traps he'd left behind when he'd given up that life. Memories of blood on snow, of pelts traded for coins, made his stomach turn. He'd found a better path through mercy, only to have violence find him again. Near midday, they came upon a deer carcass, frozen solid where wolves had brought it down. Crowfoot snorted and gave it wide berth. Boone touched the empty space at his throat where his silver crucifix had hung for 20 years. He'd need to trade it soon if he hoped to catch up to the soldiers. "Steady now," he murmured as Crowfoot picked his way down a treacherous slope. Each jolting step sent spikes of pain through Boone's skull. He clenched his jaw and endured, focusing on the ravens wheeling overhead. They seemed to be leading him toward Thompson's trading post, a day's ride ahead. The sun was setting when they finally reached the trading post, a squat log building with smoke curling from its stone chimney. Boone practically fell from the saddle, his legs trembling with exhaustion. He steadied himself against Crowfoot's warm flank before stumbling toward the door. Inside, old Thompson looked up from his ledger, eyes widening at Boone's battered appearance. "Lord above, what happened to you?" "Soldiers," Boone rasped, lowering himself onto a rough-hewn bench. "Passed through here recently?" Thompson nodded, pouring a cup of coffee with a shaking hand. "2 days ago. Whole patrol heading to Fort Redemption. Had a woman and 2 babies with them." He hesitated. "Didn't look right to me, but wasn't my place to question Army business." Boone accepted the coffee gratefully. "Which trail?" "Took the high pass. Moving fast for having little ones with them." Thompson studied Boone's face. "You're going after them, ain't you?" "Have to. Boone's voice was heavy with purpose. "Those babies, they're mine to protect." Thompson disappeared into the back room, returning with a thick wool blanket. "Trade you this for something. Nights are still deadly cold up that pass." Boone's fingers found the silver crucifix. He'd carried it since his wife died, a reminder of mercy in dark times. Now it might buy the means to save Alice and the twins. With slightly trembling fingers, he lifted the chain over his head. "This worth enough?" he asked, holding out the silver cross. Thompson took it reverently. "More than, but you'll need it more than me." He pressed the blanket into Boone's hands. "Take some jerky, too. No charge." "Much obliged." Boone tucked the blanket into his saddlebag, along with the dried meat. Every ounce of weight mattered on the treacherous passes ahead. But he couldn't risk freezing to death before he found them. Meanwhile, 40 miles away at Fort Redemption, Alice sat in the dimly lit supply shed, cradling mercy and grace against her chest. The rough wooden walls offered little protection against the bitter wind, but she'd managed to fashion a nest of empty grain sacks to keep the twins warm. "Hush now, little ones," she whispered, rocking gently as she sang. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." The familiar hymn seemed to soothe the babies. They settled against her, their tiny fingers curled into her shawl. Alice blinked back tears, remembering how Boone had looked when the soldiers dragged her away, blood streaming down his face, reaching out as flames consumed their home. "Please, Lord," she prayed silently, "let him be alive." Voices drifted through the thin walls, angry and sharp. Alice held her breath, straining to hear. "That ledger has to be somewhere." An officer's voice, thick with frustration. "Turn that mountain upside down if you have to." "Sir, we searched everything before we burned it," another man replied. "Nothing but basic supplies and some old trapping gear." "Then search again. Those records could hang half the officers in this territory. They have to be found." Alice's heart leaped. They hadn't found the ledger hidden beneath the hearthstones. Boone still had a chance to expose their crimes, if he'd survived. The voices moved away, boots crunching on gravel. Alice exhaled slowly, grateful for this small mercy. As long as the soldiers didn't know Boone had the proof, they might not kill him on sight. Grace stirred, whimpering softly. Alice touched the infant's cheek, marveling at how much had changed since that day they'd found the twins in the snow. God's purpose had seemed so clear then. 2 lost souls given a chance at family, at redemption. Now everything lay in ruins. But not everything, she reminded herself. The twins lived. Boone lived. She had to believe that. And somewhere in the ashes of their cabin lay the truth that could bring justice to this harsh land. Miles away, Boone made camp in a sheltered hollow, using Thompson's blanket to create a lean-to against the wind. He couldn't risk a fire. The soldiers might have patrols watching the trails. Instead, he huddled close to Crowfoot, sharing the horses' warmth through the bitter night. The ravens settled in nearby pine trees, their dark shapes barely visible against the star-filled sky. Boone touched his throat where the crucifix had hung, feeling its absence like a physical ache. "Guide me, Lord," he whispered into the darkness. "Make my hands just not vengeful. Help me protect what you've entrusted to me." The wind carried his prayer away into the night. Somewhere ahead lay Fort Redemption and the corrupted men who'd stolen his family. Boone knew he should feel anger, should burn with the desire for revenge. Instead, he felt only a deep, consuming need to make things right, to restore what had been broken, to protect the innocent, to bring truth to light. He thought of Alice, singing hymns to the twins, of their tiny faces turned up to heaven during their makeshift baptism. Those moments of grace seemed a lifetime ago, yet they strengthened his resolve. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice, about keeping sacred promises. Crowfoot shifted, nickering softly in the darkness. Above, the ravens rustled their wings, settling in for the night. Boone pulled the blanket tighter, preparing for another cold vigil until dawn. The pain in his head had dulled to a persistent throb, but exhaustion weighed on him like a physical burden. Still, he couldn't rest. Not while Alice and the twins were in danger. Every moment he delayed gave their captors more time to reach the fort's stone walls and iron gates. He touched his rifle, checking that it lay within easy reach. Violence wasn't his first choice. He'd seen too much bloodshed in his life. But if it came down to protecting the innocent? No, he whispered firmly, pushing away such thoughts. Your way, Lord, not mine. The night deepened. Somewhere ahead, Alice sang hymns to crying babies. Somewhere ahead, corrupt men plotted to hide their sins. And somewhere between them all lay the truth, waiting to be revealed. Boone closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to pray. Tomorrow would bring another day of pursuit, another day of pain and purpose. For now, he could only trust in the providence that had brought them this far, the same providence that had sent a starving girl to his door on a winter's night, that had delivered twin babies from death into life, that had preserved the evidence of evil men's deeds. The ravens kept their silent watch overhead, witnesses to his vigil. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that echoed off the mountain walls. Boone pulled Thompson's blanket closer, grateful for the trader's kindness, and waited for dawn. The mountain creek whispered its endless song, cold water tumbling over smooth stones. Boone stumbled, his legs finally giving out after days of relentless pursuit. The wound on his head throbbed, fever burning through his body like wildfire. As consciousness slipped away, he saw moccasined feet approach through blurred vision. "Brother," a calm voice said, "the Creator guides our paths to cross again." Boone tried to focus on the weathered face above him, recognition flickering through the haze of fever. "Henry? Gray Elk?" "Rest now," the elder said, already gathering herbs from a leather pouch at his waist. "Your body speaks of great pain. Let me help." Darkness took Boone then, memories swirling like autumn leaves. He dreamed of that day years ago, himself in a scout's buckskins, tracking a Ute hunting party through fresh snow. His captain had ordered no prisoners, but when Boone found Henry Gray Elk gathering medicine plants, he'd lowered his rifle. Their eyes had met, across the frozen clearing. Boone had nodded once, then turned away, reporting the trail gone cold. He woke to the smell of bitter herbs and wood smoke. Night had fallen, and he lay wrapped in blankets beside a small fire. His headwound had been cleaned and dressed with poulticed leaves. Henry Gray Elk sat cross-legged nearby, watching him with calm, dark eyes. "You saved me from Bullet," Henry said simply, offering a cup of steaming tea. "Now I save your spirit." Boone's hands shook as he took the cup. "Why help me?" "Creator's ways are circle, not line." Henry gestured to the stars above. "What goes comes back. You showed mercy then. Mercy finds you now." The tea was bitter, but brought clarity to Boone's fevered mind. He told Henry everything. Alice appearing at his door, the miraculous twins, the ledger proving the army's theft from the Ute people, the burning of his cabin, the soldiers taking his family. "Fort Redemption," Henry nodded. 2 days' journey by old hunting trails. But first, you must heal. "No time." Boone tried to rise, but fell back, dizzy. "They need me. Cannot help them if you die on trail." Henry's voice was firm but gentle. "1 day of rest, then we go together." "We?" My people starve because of stolen rations. Your truth can help them too." Henry added more herbs to the fire, fragrant smoke rising. "Sleep now. Let medicine work." Through the night, Henry tended him with skills passed down through generations. He told stories of his people's ways, of balance and forgiveness, of reading the land's signs like a holy book. Boone drifted between sleep and waking, the elder's wisdom seeping into his troubled soul like rain into parched earth. Dawn found him stronger. They shared a simple meal of dried meat and cornmeal cakes. As Henry packed his medicines, Boone spoke the shame that had haunted him since that long-ago day. "I scouted against your people," he said heavily, "led soldiers to your camps, watched children cry from hunger while officers lied about supplies." Henry paused in his work. "Then walk different now." "How can that be enough?" "Yesterday's path cannot be unwalked," Henry said, "but today's path, that you choose." He shouldered his pack. "Come, I show you old ways through mountains." They traveled swiftly along hidden trails that wound through deep valleys. Henry moved like smoke between trees, reading signs invisible to most men's eyes. He taught as they walked, which plants healed, which clouds meant storm, how to step softly on sacred ground. "You're Alice," Henry said as they rested briefly by a spring. "She carries mother's heart?" "Gentlest I've known," Boone replied. "Sings to the twins like songbirds." Henry nodded, satisfied. "Good. Children need soft voices in hard world." He studied Boone's face. "You love her?" Boone stared into the spring's clear depths. "Never meant to. Thought my heart died with my first wife. But Alice..." He struggled to find words. "She brought light back. Made me remember mercy." "Then we must hurry," Henry said, rising. "Love like that is rare medicine." They pushed on as afternoon faded toward dusk. Henry led them to a high meadow for the night's camp, saying the open sky would speak to them. As darkness fell, the northern lights began their dance, ribbons of green and purple shimmering across the stars. "Sky's own prayer," Henry said softly, watching the lights pulse and flow. "Creator reminds us beauty lives even in darkness." Boone fed small sticks into their fire, remembering other nights beneath these same stars. Nights when Alice rocked the twins to sleep. Nights when hope felt as natural as breathing. "Alice," he whispered to the flames, her name a prayer of its own. Henry Gray Elk watched him with knowing eyes. "Your heart walks good road now, brother. Not revenge that drives you. Love." "Both, maybe," Boone admitted. "Part of me wants to hurt those men like they hurt us." "Natural feeling," Henry nodded. "But poison medicine kills the one who carries it." He drew patterns in the dirt with a stick. "Better to seek justice than vengeance. Justice heals. Vengeance wounds deeper." The northern lights rippled overhead like a living thing. Boone thought of the ledger hidden beneath his cabin's hearthstones, proof of men's greed and cruelty. But he also thought of Alice's faith, of the twins' innocent faces, of Henry's wisdom about walking different paths. "Tell me about your people's ways," Boone said quietly. "About finding balance when the world tips wrong." So Henry spoke through the night, sharing ancient stories of harmony restored, of bridges built between enemies, of healing found in unexpected places. His words wove with the fire's crackle and the wind's whisper, teaching lessons Boone wished he'd learned years ago. "Sun comes soon," Henry said as the stars began to fade. "Fort Redemption lies below Next Valley. But first..." He opened his medicine pouch and took out a small leather bag. "Blessing for clear eyes and strong heart." He mixed herbs with water in a wooden cup, singing soft words in his native tongue. The melody seemed to draw the last shimmer of northern lights down from the sky. "Drink," he said, offering the cup. "Let Creator's medicine guide your path." Boone drank. The liquid tasted of earth and sky together, bitter yet somehow sweet. As the sun's first rays touched the mountains, he felt strength flowing back into his weary bones. More than that, he felt purpose, clean and clear as morning light. "Thank you, brother," he said simply. Henry Gray Elk smiled, already gathering their few supplies. "Thank me by bringing truth to light, by protecting weak from strong, by remembering mercy outlasts hate." They stood together watching dawn paint the peaks gold. Somewhere below, Alice waited. Somewhere below, truth needed telling. And here on this high meadow, two men once meant to be enemies shared the peace of a new day's promise. "Time to walk different," Boone whispered, and they began their descent toward Fort Redemption. Fort Redemption's walls rose gray against the purple dawn sky. Boone and Henry crouched in the shelter of pine trees, watching soldiers make their morning rounds along the wooden ramparts. The fort's heavy gates stood open, wagons of supplies already rolling in for the day's trade. "Many eyes," Henry whispered, nodding towards the guards. "But not all see true." Boone adjusted the bundle of fox pelts he'd taken from an abandoned trapline. His borrowed buckskins and mud-streaked face made him look like any mountain man coming to trade. "You're sure about waiting here?" "Better I stay hidden," Henry said. "My presence too soon makes soldiers nervous. Wait for right moment." Inside the fort, Alice stood straight-backed before the chaplain in his austere office. Morning light through the window caught dust motes dancing around her head like a halo. Two soldiers flanked her, rifles ready. "Miss Miller," the chaplain said, his voice weary. "You stand accused of sedition against the United States Army. Captain Drayton claims you conspired to steal official documents and spread lies about this fort's operations." Alice's hands were bound, but her voice rang clear. "The Lord knows the truth, even if men bury it." The chaplain sighed and opened his mouth to respond, but commotion in the yard drew their attention. Boone had entered through the gates, limping slightly, his pack of furs slung over one shoulder. He nodded to the guards, playing the simple trapper to perfection. "Got some prime fox pelts to trade?" he called out, his voice rough. "Reckon the captain might want first pick." Captain Drayton emerged from his office, straightening his uniform jacket. His face showed satisfaction as he announced to the gathering crowd, "The evidence of this woman's crimes is destroyed. That troublesome ledger burned quite nicely with the mountain man's cabin." Boone's hand tightened on his pack strap, but he kept his voice steady. "Seems a shame to burn good paper in these parts, Captain." He reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded letter. "Speaking of paper, I've got something might interest you." "What's this?" Drayton demanded, snatching the letter. "Quartermaster's letter," Boone said clearly, dropping his trapper's drawl. "Names me legal guardian to those twin babies you took. Also mentions some interesting figures about missing rations." The captain's face darkened. "This is nonsense. Chaplain, pay no attention." But a new voice spoke from the fort gates. "Perhaps the chaplain should read it." Henry Gray Elk stood in the entrance, his dignity silencing the sudden murmurs of the crowd. "Truth fears no light." The soldiers stiffened at the sight of a Ute elder, but none dared show disrespect. Henry's calm presence seemed to fill the yard with ancient authority. The chaplain cleared his throat. "Yes, I should read it." He took the letter from Drayton's trembling hands and began to read aloud. As I can hush, the words echoed across the yard, dates, amounts, signatures proving the systematic theft of native rations. Men began to hang their heads. Some removed their hats. Others stared hard at the ground, unable to meet Henry's steady gaze. "This letter bears the quartermaster's seal," the chaplain said finally, "and names Thatcher Boone as both witness to these crimes and legal guardian to the infant girls currently in our custody." He turned to Captain Drayton. "Sir, I must order the immediate release of Miss Miller and the children." "You can't," Drayton began, but the chaplain cut him off. "I can and I must. God's law demands truth be honored." He nodded to the guards. "Untie her." Alice's bonds were cut. She rushed to Boone, who caught her in his arms. "The twins?" he whispered. "Safe," she breathed. "In the infirmary. I never left them alone." Henry Gray Elk stepped forward, his moccasins silent on the packed earth. "Now truth walks in sunlight," he said. "What comes next must be justice, not revenge." The chaplain nodded slowly. "Indeed. Captain Drayton, consider yourself relieved of duty pending investigation. I will send full report to Territory Command." He turned to Boone and Alice. "You are free to go. The children will be brought immediately." Boone held Alice close, feeling her trembling slowly ease. Around them, the fort stirred with the first winds of change, men whispering, secrets surfacing, long-buried truth rising like spring water through mountain snow. "Thank you," Alice said to Henry, "for helping bring truth to light." The elder smiled gently. "Light was always there. We just needed courage to open our eyes." The mountain air tasted of pine and promise as Boone's wagon creaked up the familiar trail to 10 Mile Ridge. Alice sat beside him, cradling the sleeping twins in her lap, while Henry Gray Elk rode alongside on his painted pony. Behind them, the wagon bed was loaded with supplies from Fort Redemption, compensation ordered by the chaplain for their burned possessions. Spring sunshine had melted most of the snow, revealing blackened timbers where their cabin had stood. But Boone didn't see ruin anymore. He saw foundation stones still solid in the earth, waiting for new walls to rise. "The creek stones will serve well," Henry observed, dismounting to examine the scattered rocks. "They remember their places." Alice laid the twins on a soft blanket near the old hearth stones, which had survived the fire. Mercy and Grace immediately began crawling, giggling as they explored the warm earth. Their tiny hands patted the ground, innocent of the struggles that had marked this place. "We'll start with the foundation," Boone said, unloading tools from the wagon. "The chaplain's men found good pine logs in the valley, enough for walls and roof beams." They worked through the morning, Henry showing them how to choose the strongest stones from the creek bed. His weathered hands demonstrated the ancient art of fitting, rock to rock without mortar. "Like puzzle pieces," he explained. "Each one holds its neighbor." Alice gathered smaller stones while Boone and Henry hauled the larger ones. She'd pause often to check on the twins, who seemed content to watch the building take shape from their blanket. Sometimes they'd catch her eye and smile, their faces so full of trust it made her heart ache with gratitude. By afternoon, they'd raised the stone foundation 2 feet high. Boone began positioning the first wall logs, notching them carefully at the corners as Henry had shown him. The elder worked alongside him, his movements precise and unhurried. "I reckon I owe you more than thanks," Boone said quietly as they fitted another log. "You saved more than my life on that trail." Henry paused, studying the horizon. "The mountain forgives those who listen," he said. "You learned to hear with your heart, not just ears. That was your own doing." Alice brought them water in tin cups, then returned to sorting salvaged nails and hinges. The twins had dozed off in the shade of a young aspen, their tiny hands clasped as if sharing dreams. She hummed an old hymn as she worked, and the sound drifted up with wood smoke from their cooking fire. As sunset painted the ridge in gold, they stood back to admire their progress. The cabin walls rose halfway up, solid and true. The stone foundation gleamed with creek water still clinging to its surface. Tomorrow they would finish the walls and begin on the roof. "I must return to my people," Henry said, gathering his few belongings. "But I leave knowing good hearts guard this place now." Boone clasped his arm firmly. "You'll always have friendship here, Henry Gray Elk." The elder smiled, touching his chest. "I carry it already." He bent to touch each twin's forehead in blessing, then mounted his pony and rode away down the darkening trail. Alice slipped her hand into Boone's as they watched Henry disappear into the trees. "We'll raise them in peace," she whispered. "Teach them mercy and grace in more than just their names." "That we will." Boone squeezed her hand gently. "God's own promise, given twice." Around them, the mountain evening settled in soft and clean. Early spring flowers pushed through patches of melting snow, purple pasque flowers and white mountain dryad, delicate as hope itself. Tomorrow would bring more building, more healing, more life growing from what had seemed dead. Boone walked to the wagon and pulled out his carving tools. In the fading light, he began shaping new cradles from sweet-smelling pine. Alice gathered early herbs from sunny slopes, sage, yarrow, and wild mint, planting them near the cabin's future door. When full darkness came, they sat by the fire with the sleeping twins between them. Their prayer rose with the sparks into the star-filled sky, thanksgiving for the grace that had carried them through trial to this new beginning. "The Lord builds stronger than we do," Boone said softly, watching the flames dance. "Stone on stone, heart to heart." Alice nodded, her face peaceful in the firelight. "And love makes it home." Summer painted 10-Mile Ridge in vibrant hues. Wildflowers dotted the green meadows where deer grazed at dawn, and birdsong filled the crystal mountain air from sunrise to sunset. The rebuilt cabin stood strong against the backdrop of towering pines, smoke curling from its stone chimney like a gentle prayer. Inside, life moved to the rhythm of the seasons. Alice kept the hearth warm and the garden growing, while Boone maintained their defenses and brought home game. The twins flourished under their care, growing stronger each day. One crisp morning, Boone led Alice to a sun-dappled clearing, his old rifle cradled in his arms. "Time you learned to hunt," he said softly. "Can't always depend on me being here." Alice handled the weapon with careful respect as Boone showed her how to load and aim. Her first shots went wild, but she persisted. By midday, she could hit a knot in a fallen log at 20 paces. "You're a natural," Boone praised, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Next we'll try for rabbit." In return, during quiet evenings when the twins slept, Alice sat beside Boone at the table. She guided his rough finger across the pages of his old Bible, helping him remember the letters he had forgotten in his years alone. "The Lord is my shepherd," Boone read slowly, his voice growing more confident with each word. "I shall not want." Alice smiled, remembering how she had once feared to pray aloud. Now their cabin rang with scripture and song, prayers and laughter. The twins absorbed it all, their eyes bright with curiosity as they watched their parents' evening ritual. Through late summer and into autumn, mercy and grace grew strong. They crawled everywhere, exploring their world with fearless determination. Alice found them in the oddest places, under the table, behind the wood box, even trying to climb into the empty wash basin. Their first steps came on a quiet afternoon in early fall. Boone had just returned from checking his trap lines when he heard Alice's excited call. He rushed inside to find both girls wobbling on their feet, holding on to the edge of the hearth. "Come to Papa," he whispered, kneeling with open arms. The twins looked at each other, giggled, and took their first tottering steps together. 4 steps each before they tumbled into his embrace. Alice wiped happy tears from her eyes. Just like they came to us, together. The days grew shorter, and the mountain air carried the bite of approaching winter. One morning they woke to find the world transformed. The season's first snow had fallen in the night, covering everything in pristine white. Alice sat in the rocking chair Boone had carved for her, each twin cradled in an arm. The girls were almost asleep, lulled by the chair's gentle motion and their mother's soft humming. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted down like tiny stars, catching the warm lamplight as they fell. "You said I'd birth you twins," Alice murmured, looking up at Boone where he stood by the fire. He turned to her, his weathered face softening with a smile. "Didn't say how the Lord would do it," he replied gently, "only that he would." The truth of it filled the room like a physical presence. God's prophecy, spoken in that desperate night so long ago, had found its perfect fulfillment, not through birth, but through mercy, through grace, through love. Together they bowed their heads in silent gratitude for the strange and wonderful path that had brought them here, for the divine hand that had guided them through fire and snow, loss and redemption, for the miracle of family, given not by blood, but by faith. The twins stirred in Alice's arms, reaching for each other as they always did. In their innocent faces glowed the proof of God's tender care, his ability to bring life from death, joy from sorrow, and love from the ashes of despair. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blessing their mountain home with peace. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.